Hi. Out of curiosity, how many people here think of themselves as from the industrial space or IoT? Cool. All right, well, hello, I'm Ryan McKinley. I recently joined Grafana, but I've worked with Influx and Grafana for many years. So I'm gonna kind of walk through the story of kind of how I got to where I am, so it's all about me for a while, sorry. So I spent a long time working in Apache, Lucene, and Solar. So if you got questions about that, ask me, but that was years ago. Built some open source business around that, so similar ideas. But then later joined a renewable energy startup here in Alameda, so I live across the bay. And we started using Grafana and Influx to monitor a new hydropower turbine. So the project was essentially this idea of a new kind of hydropower system that would try and have less environmental impact by having multiple smaller dams instead of a great big one. It looked kind of like that. So I joined and saw a system that looked like this. If anyone's familiar with this space, this is kind of what dashboard, and this is a good-looking dashboard in kind of Allen Bradley world. So to get some graphs, you go dig deeper. Here's some buttons. We've all seen these dashboards, I assume. Well, I'm afraid some of us have, maybe, is the truth. So here's a flow chart of how this whole thing works together. It's pretty awful. And that's kind of what I walked into. And I was like, what can we do that's a little better? So it's factory talk is it's Visual Basic. So you can take, used RX Logic, which is an Allen Bradley industrial PLC, read some sensors out. We sent that to Influx. Hey, this is great. And then you add that to Grafana, and suddenly you've got a much, much more compelling story of how your stuff is working. You don't have like a mechanical engineer, trying to dig through Visual Basic to make some basic graphs. So I think this is a story that's like made Influx and made Grafana really successful, is that it just start throwing some stuff at it and it works. So it's a really great solution. Everyone's really happy. All right, but then, we got that win of like, hey, we're all doing well. We're doing well with this. We can see what's happening. But now I want to see higher resolution data, what happens. So, you start putting some data in, you want to see it live. Like, so do we have a dashboard that we refresh, every 5 seconds? Is that good? Usually it's fine. That'll work. You take that data and then you zoom out. We've all sort of seen this, I'm familiar with this look of like you zoom out and it's 20 seconds later because people look at the dashboard built for, the last 30 minutes of data and then zoom out to a year. Like, okay, well, I can see why they wanted to do that, but so you have to be really careful about how you do this. So I got really excited a few years ago for intelligent roll-ups and querying of aggregate data. Influx was going to solve this all for me. But, it's a hard problem. So in the end, what we ended up doing, which I assume most people do, is sort of some series of roll-ups of query that data, put it into a new essentially database, make your query, check for those, and select based on your time from your range. Looks like Flux may sort of help us do that all kind of out of the box, which is amazing. I'm looking forward to that. Let's see, is this going to the next guy? Next. Reconnecting. That's not good. Present. Loading. This is when you tell a joke. This is when I tell a joke. You don't. Wait, oh, look at that. Oh, control. Here we are. No need for the jokes. Perfect. All right. So the next thing I was looking at is like, Grafana as a general SCADA. Obviously, the control side of it is an issue. It's like, how do you take input into it? But Grafana has this ability to put custom components in any panel. So we built this system that you essentially could author a set of buttons so that you could have the start button and the stop button and some, set the guide vane angles through forms straight in the control. So that's good. So out of this, I'd say, I was there for a while, built a reasonable solution, a bunch of custom parts. It's a little bit weird because, that's what happens when you have software people write stuff. It gets a little weird. And it's a little hard to maintain. And, but it's still running. And, like any good engineer in the Bay Area, I left and then started working at a renewable energy, or at a residential solar company. So in this, we were looking at how do we change how residential solar is sold, so from a construction project and trying to convert that more to like an appliance sale. So can we have a single system that kind of puts that all together, so through hardware, make sure that this whole thing is safe, and then you can get essentially stickers that say the government, say building inspectors don't really need to check it because we've guaranteed that it's safe. So with that, it was kind of a different set of problems. So instead of really expensive hardware where you could put a lot of expensive solutions onto it, this is like, how do we do this with the least expensive, kind of lowest power infrastructure, but I still want to have a similar experience with live debugging without a system administrator. That's the other one. It's like, obviously, when you have expensive hardware, you can put the resources into someone who's going to care about how well that database works. When you've got cheap resources, no one's ever going to look at that, right? It's like, it just needs to work. You can't depend on it later. It's going to be disconnected a lot. So it just kind of has to be as few moving parts as possible. So with that, I was looking at how can I have sort of live real-time data come off these very inexpensive devices, seeing it in real time, but then sending aggregate data and kind of key events to the cloud where we have the resources to maintain it in aggregate. So for this, I got really involved in looking at how Grafana is supporting queries, how it's supporting streaming. It's kind of a little problematic, I'd say. But so I started pushing on this issue a lot of like, how do I get my streaming data in there? How can I work with Grafana with a range of databases, super powerful like Influx, or no power at all, like a CSV file? Like, can we work with those in concert together? So this data source is kind of what I'd started with. This is essentially you connect to a web page, and it just starts writing a CSV file. So super, as basic a streaming as you could do, no WebSockets, anything. So this was a PR that I worked on for months with Grafana trying to make this happen, and eventually got it in. Earlier this summer, I joined Grafana, just because there was a recognition that I've been working on these, like pushing Grafana to do these really interesting SCADA projects for hardware companies that, the reality was my software wasn't going to make them successful or not. So I'm looking at ways like, okay, my work, I can do that, and then all of you guys can also use the benefits of sort of as we push Grafana into the industrial space, into analytics. So I'm pretty excited about that. And here's the demo part. I'm going to switch over to a demo and show you building a dashboard live. Oh, in the most recent version of Grafana that came out, I think, yesterday, the query interface behind the scenes has changed so that instead of being a simple request response, so you request data and previously the API got back a promise of the response, now every query returns an observable of the response. So behind the scenes now, every Grafana query essentially is able to continue to update itself. And so I'm pretty excited about that because that changes what's possible pretty dramatically. So what I'm going to show you in the best of conference etiquette is stuff that I started working on last week, end of the week. I had really planned to show it to our UX team to get some feedback before you guys see it, but no, these are new features that nobody's seen before, so you'll be the first. And with that, we'll see what happens here. All right, so here's Grafana. I'm going to just create a new dashboard. So you've seen this before. I will add a query, seen this before. No problem. So I had planned on showing a mix of Influx, actually hitting Influx, but I'll just assume you guys can, I'm gonna be upfront, this is just the test data source that's spitting out fake data, and I never got around to getting it to work with Influx, but you believe me. All right, so query. Great, I've got one query, it goes and gets data. I want to show the last 1 minute of data. All right, so 1 minute of data. We see a graph here. Hey, great, no problem. But one of the main issues that I have that we were talking about earlier is how do we deal with these roll-ups? So as I'm looking at one minute of data, what I want to see is really different than if I zoom out and see 10 minutes or a week. So the thing I've added, that this is what has never been passed before, is a new type of data source. So this is from time. So now you see I had a query, and my query switched to saying, at this time, I'm going to run my query here. So I'm going to zoom out and show 5 minutes of data and set up a different query for 5 minutes of data. So for this, I'll put 2 series on it, just so you can see there's a difference. So if I'm in 1 minute of data, you see one series. If I'm in 5 minutes of data, you see a different query is hit. This is stuff that I think what's interesting about the Flux and where you're going with chronograph is there's a certain amount of if you know what you're looking at, you don't really want people creating queries. You just you want to see what you're doing, and those queries are different at different resolutions. So I'll go to 15 minutes, and I'll configure a new query. We'll just add it. So now I've got 3 series, right? These are just fake series for now, but you can believe me. So this is great. All right, so I'm going to go back to my dashboard, go to 1 minute, 15 minutes, you see 3 series, 5 minutes, 2 series. Let me save this in case I mess up. Streaming demo. All right, you're like, hey, it's not streaming. What's going on? You lied to me. All right, so 1 minute data. I'll edit this again. So you see I'm on, by looking at 1 minute, I get this query. I'm going to switch to a different query that's a streaming client, where this is, again, it's a fake data one. If you see my little table out there, there's a little joystick. I didn't want to get too complicated up here, so I can show this to you. So this is essentially events coming in, and rather than getting a query to get back the whole response, we're just getting events as they come to us, and then adding them up to see a real-time stream of this information. So now, if I go, I'm going to select to say I only want to see this live one if I'm saying essentially a query that goes back to now. If I'm exploring around data, I don't want to get these streaming events as they come in. So let's go back here. So last minute of data, let's go out 15 minutes. If I zoom in, oh, that's last 1 minute of data, streaming again. Great. All right, so now we set up a kind of complicated query for that panel. And you guys have all struggled with this before. Is now I want to show some portion of that. Every time I do that, do I have to go through and rebuild all those queries? And so I'm going to add a new panel. Let's add a gauge here. So here's a gauge. You've seen this, but I actually want to use those same results that we just added to that previous panel. So instead of building up that query again, I'm just going to reference it. I want to just use those exact same results. We've already made them. We've already made the request. So now I'm just going to broadcast the results to multiple panels. So here's my dashboard. Let me pick which panel. So that was that panel. So this is not a new query. It's essentially, as things get queried, the results get sent to 2 panels. So we'll put this guy over here. Drop that down. Maybe I'll add this, give this some more resolution. Okay, so you can see it's changing. Great, okay. So now we've got, save. So now we've got a panel. We set up a kind of complicated idea of a query that could go, perhaps zoomed all the way in. We're looking at a WebSocket that's just getting changes. Zoom out, I look at a query that's in Influx, zoom out further, and it's hitting some different roll-ups. Because those are hard to it's hard to create a single query that you could represent that variety of changes just with template variables or something like that. But it's also a little wonky in general. But so next, I'll show you another thing. So I'm going to duplicate this guy. I'll duplicate this guy, and let's edit it. And we'll do a bar gauge on this one. So this is another. So this gauge is now showing all that same data, but what if, I got results from my data source that returned a bunch of things. And as Grafana is now, you whatever you get back is what's shown. You have to manipulate your query to get the exact results you want to see. And what we're looking at is now I've got this thing, so I've shared them across, but I want to transform them a little bit before showing them. So we're just going to take all those results that we got into them. I'm going to filter them, so I only want to show the value. Oh, I remember one other thing that I forgot to do, but we'll forget about that for now. All right, so now I've got the same data that my kind of overly complex query at the beginning where I set up multiple resolutions, I've kind of reused that same effort across my dashboard so that I'm not getting these to be quite as cumbersome as they've been in the past, and also allowing much more kind of fluid interaction between these things so that we can leverage the power of the database when it exists, but also allow much lower resource databases to play in the same space. Let's see. I think that's kind of my shtick for you guys. I should check my time. I think I've got plenty of time for questions. So have at it. Yeah. The which?
Does the same concept work with the composite panel?
The composite panel meaning?
In Grafana, you have composite panel offered as a plugin.
Oh, yeah. No, I've deleted that panel. So that was the very first time. So actually, when I started in March, Grafana had released a React migration of all the panels. And I've been using Grafana for a while, and as a plugin developer. And what I saw was they essentially took all the problems that were part of the way Angular panels had been released and just duplicated them again. Essentially just made the same situation, but now we're in React. So that's when I started getting really involved in trying to push on Grafana, oh wait, you need to fix these problems. If you release a thing, it needs to actually be a thing. The composite panel was this kind of, literally it was a demo written 2 days before the Grafana conference that set up these examples of the way to reuse values. So this is my answer to why we can get rid of the composite panel. Because the reason you would want to do a composite panel, which was we released a gauge component in React and a bar gauge component in React. Now, if I want to reuse those, I can put a bar gauge next to a gauge and use it as a programmer. But what you really want to do is just avoid that second query. So I recently cut the composite panel, deleted it, sorry. And the answer is you can use this instead by configuring a query and building up multiple panels to use it. Anyone else? Yeah? Your live is a different source?
Well, I've got a lot of stuff in InfluxDB that's historic, where historic might go up to like 15 minutes ago or however long it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, so the
Can you say the
repeat the question so that
Yeah,
the
so-
live stream gets it?
Got it. So his question is about how do, if you've got data from multiple sources, where live data is from one data source, maybe it's from a message bus, and then your historic data is from Influx, how would you mix those together? And within Grafana, there's a little known feature that the thing I just showed you is actually a slight variation of, is there's a mixed data source. So within a single panel, you can say, I want to use a mixed data source, and then from that, each time you add a query, you also specify which database you're going to, or which data source you're going to. So that's a way of having, in the same panel, for the same query, hitting multiple data voids.
So would that mix with your time? You had different queries based on the window of time. That's one of your new.
Exactly. So what I just added, so I extended that to say, let me group those by time so that you could either specify a range. So if my query covers a certain amount of range, let's hit some set of queries. Or if the interval, so the interval we calculate is based on number of pixels you'll see. So you can pick your query based either on range or on interval. And then within that, there's still a mixed query. So within here, if we look at, so add query now, the difference of the mixed one is every time you add a query, you're asked which data source you want to use. So in each of these, so you'll see if I zoom out to my 30-minute one, when I add a query to it, I ask, do I want to see, I'll do another direct input. There we go. Okay, so that one shows up. So it's a third input field here.
That may solve some problems we have. Thanks.
Yeah, that feature has actually been around for a long, long time. It's just very few people know about it. I should be clear that what I've shown you today, this from time query, that's new, Friday on my computer only. Hopefully in the next version, so probably, a couple months from now. The thing that I showed you about sharing dashboards, sharing queries across dashboards, that is in what was released yesterday, but you have to enable alpha features. And then this last one of selecting the transformations is a further kind of alpha flag that you have to enable. So the filtering results and the sharing queries is real. The time-based thing is kind of a future step. But I think in general, like these are the types of problems I'm interested in. It's Grafana at large has had a lot of energy and effort put towards, I'd say, DevOps stories, and I'm looking much more at how do we exist in an industrial space, which requires like real-time, like immediate feedback, fewest steps in between you and kind of the SCADA system, but then seamless integration with Historian, where Influx has always been this amazing, almost drop-in replacement for the SQL historians that are all over the industry, but we're missing how to have the sort of buttons, the VB-style buttons that make a viable SCADA system. Anyone else?
Awesome, Ron. Appreciate
Great.
it. Thank you so much.
Thanks
It's
for
been good.
having us.